Welcome, everybody, to the Cub Youth webinar on youth ministry compensation. We are very excited to have Dan Navarro with us from chemistry staffing, one of the lead researcher on the whole youth pastor compensation report that comes out every year. And it has been a gold mine for us in youth ministry, especially those who are full-time, who are trying to figure out how to negotiate salaries and what can we expect. So very excited to have you here, Dan. And can you just give us just a kind of a short bio? I know you were in youth ministry for a while
Yeah,
and you're doing all sorts of different things.
sure. Yeah, happy to help. First of all, thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. The survey started out as a passion project in a sense, and it happened on accident, right? Necessity is the chief engine of ingenuity, I guess, is a good way of saying it. But the necessity that bore it out was I was a youth pastor. I was in youth ministry, and I was getting close to wrapping up seminary, and I'd hit that magic 10-year mark in youth ministry. Which, if you ever look at a job board, like they want the 3 to 5 year experience, they want the 5 to 10 year experience. I hit the 10-year mark, and I just felt like, man, I probably am due a raise at some point here. And so I put a quick form up on Facebook in a popular youth ministry Facebook group, and it had like 7 questions. And I was hoping that I could get like 40 people to basically tell me, like, how many years have you been working? What's your education? And what do you make? And within a couple hours, I had over 400 people
Wow.
respond. Yeah. And that was like my first clue that I had touched a pain point. And so I quickly got some friends involved who were in the publishing space and said, I think we need to kind of blow this up a little bit. And the youth pastor compensation survey was born. That was 7 years ago. And to date, now we've had over 10,000 youth pastors take the survey. It's not 8 questions anymore. It's like 53 or 55. It's always different every year. But we have the same kind of group of core questions every year. And we do that to kind of have apples to apples data year over year so we can look at trends and kind of do the state of youth ministry compensation at kind of every year. And so I do the research, I promote it, I post it on Facebook and get it on email lists. And then I write a report analyzing the data. And to put that in perspective, if you have 1,000 youth pastors take a survey with 50 questions, that's 50,000 cells of data that I have to mine through. And so I've done that every year. It's kind of my Christmas break gift to myself, because I always write the survey between Christmas and New Year's. And then Mark Ostreicher's been our general editor for years. He helps me write and edit the final report. We publish it and make it available for free. And hopefully it's an empowering tool for youth pastors.
It has been not just youth pastors. I've passed it on to many, many search committees
Yes.
as they're going through the process, and just it's like they have no idea what to pay. It
No.
really is a wide variety, just variance and range of salary and compensation. And so this gives just some meat to expectations. So really appreciate the work.
Yeah, thanks. The coolest part I think that's happened from this is, um, I'll give you a brief history lesson on church administration. There used to be this thing called the Hammer Compensation Manual. It was Richard Hammer put together this book that church administrators would buy every year, and it would be go to page 67, and there'd be tables on this book that was this. It's like a textbook. And if you filled out the tables the right way, you could figure out what a clergy member's salary in your area was. And then about 10 years ago, they turned it into a PDF that you could download finally, because, the internet. Well, that Hammer compensation manual has been folded into churchsalary.com's salary tool. And that's a subsidiary of Christianity Today. And I have been grateful for a partnership that just developed over the years with them, where now they actually use my data in their compensation calculator that is going out to churches all across the nation. And so you could literally pay $25 on their website and run a report, and it will give you geographically like traced data from my survey, because most of the data they have for youth pastors is from me over the years. And I just think that's super cool, because that means churches are using this to set compensation real time in their area.
Well, that's actually the second tool that I recommend to search committee. So that's hilarious. It's kind of the
Great.
double whammy, and it's like, yeah, it's Well, you've done a ton of work, and the information that you found has really it's been interesting to watch how it's evolved,
Yeah.
and, especially, of course, I'm interested in the gender stuff, having been in youth ministry my whole
Hmm.
adult life and, having
Yeah.
seen the discrepancies there, but, um, let's step back, kind of big picture, you've been doing this since 2017. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in, youth ministry compensation?
Yeah, so the first of all, the trend is it has gone up every year I've done it. The national average has gone up. And I have taken great care to measure that average the same way every year. And when I talk about this, I realize there's a whole slew of bivocational youth pastors out there that are part-time at their church. For our purposes, we refer mostly in the survey to full-time youth pastors, which is anybody who's 30 hours or more as a youth pastor. So if you're full-time salary exempt or you're 30 hours regular, you qualify for the data pool. We still let part-time people take it, and I've done blurbs in the past on part-time youth pastors, but there's just so much variance all over the board. We've kind of shied away from that a little bit. And they're in the minority, so it's just playing to the majority. But um, the trends that I've seen, besides it going up every year, is it's kind of gone up at a similar number. It's not like we've seen huge spikes any one year. It's been around 2% most of the years that it's gone up, um, which sounds like a little bit, but when the national average is around 50 grand, 2% is it's $1,000. So that $1,000 spread out over 12 months is almost $100 a month, and that's somebody's cell phone bill. That's like real money for a youth pastor in their family budget. And so we've tracked that kind of every year, and some of the other trends that are a little bit, I would say, disheartening. Most of the news is not good, is the reality. Um, and part of that is due to the cost of living in America having gone up significantly, inflation numbers, all the things that professional economists use to talk about the economy, the COLA, cost of living adjustment for Social Security, that's one number. The national inflation number is another number. The cost of housing, a teacher's salary. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can look at as barometers for the economy. And all of those are going up more than 2% a year on average. And
Wow.
so the sad part of a lot of the trend in data is churches, and this is true of nonprofits, I think in general, they're not keeping up with the rate of inflation in our country. The wage increases. I'm in California, and there's a sign right now at In-N-Out for $22 an hour, like $22 an hour. Which, if you do the math, like that's 40 something $1,000 a year starting. Like I could be 16 years old
Wow.
making that.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
the days where we paid, like my first job out of college as a 22-year-old youth pastor, paid $36,000. And there's still people around the nation making that wage. In California, that was a low wage at the time. And shortly thereafter, it went up to $40,000. And then I took a job at a different church at $50,000. And like you see the ramp up, but at some point, $50,000 became not a lot where I live in California. And we felt the effects of that. As at the same time, we're buying a house, buying a van, having kids, learning about medical dependence, and all those different things that go into compensation. And the trend is, call it burnout, call it whatever you will. A lot of youth pastors can't afford to stay in youth ministry. That's been
Yep.
the killer. And so the typical junior high, high school kid will have 2 or 3 youth pastors because their church they can't retain the youth pastor. So I mean that's a big generalization, but I have the stats to actually back it up now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that was so discouraging just to see, how it has stayed low, and yet I try to balance that with I've got a list of, probably about 10 churches, I'm pointing my glass board here, 10 churches that are looking and cannot find a youth pastor,
Yes.
and, part of it is I look at job descriptions and I'm going, "It's 2 weeks vacation for the first 4 years." It's like,
Yes.
you're not gonna find
Yes.
anybody for that.
Yes. There's a couple of things that have really affected, I think, the candidacy out there, and we have been saying for years at Chemistry Staffing, where I serve as a church coach, it's a candidate's market. If you're good at what you do, I don't care what you are on paper. If you have a track record of I can train volunteers, I can bring kids in, I can teach them the Bible, like basic youth pastor 101 stuff. Uh, you have a track record of growing a youth ministry. You don't even need a college degree anymore, and you can find a job because churches are hiring skill sets left and right now. Now, that may not necessarily
Yeah.
be true in the covenant denomination because there is an emphasis on education and certification and ordination and all that. But in the non-denominational streams, you're very hireable. A master's degree every year that I've tracked it has gone down in subsequent value, meaning the college degree compensation level is X and a master's average is X plus Y. That Y has gotten smaller every year. It's
Wow.
trending down. And the days of youth pastors having that stigma of they just hang out in the basement and eat pizza and play dodgeball is gone. Over 80% of all youth pastors have completed a 4-year degree.
They
Like
have or have
it,
not.
have. It
Yeah.
is a professional industry now where you can get some real skill set. And so youth pastors are trying to figure out, wow, I got student loans. I went to seminary. I got a degree in Bible from a school and cost a lot of money. And I'm not making enough to pay it, let alone pay my mortgage. So there's a lot of startling trends in that space as well.
Yep. I was surprised in reading through the report that it was not even the size of your youth group, because I think that used to be something that youth pastors were
Yeah.
like, well, I've got a big group, so therefore I should be getting paid more. And it's like, according
Yes.
to the report, that doesn't make a whole lot of difference.
No, there's a lot of churches. In fact, I would say the majority of churches in America are 250 people or less on Sunday, right?
Mm.
And the second position that church typically hires after the senior solo pastor is an associate pastor who, by the way, you're the youth pastor. And so there's a lot of churches that have a 12 or 20 kid youth group, and that pastor is actually making pretty good money, relatively speaking. And then you go up to the 700 person church, and they just scraped by and got a high school director, and that high school director is making less money, but they have a specialized job. So it's what we found over the years is youth ministry size does not indicate, it's not correlated to salary. It's just
Mm.
not, because there's plenty of really large, relatively speaking, youth ministries, right? You're at a church of 200 running 50 kids. That's massive, right? Per capita.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of people that are running big youth ministries that are making not a lot of money. There's plenty of people running really small youth ministries that are making relatively good money compared to their peers. Where we found the real determining factors are the biggest determining factors are the size of the congregation on a weekend, so general average attendance, and what is typically correlated to that directly is the size of the general fund, the budget of the church.
Mm.
And so the bigger the church attendance, the bigger the budget, the more we can afford to pay. Those year after year have proven to be the top two indicators of what you can expect for compensation.
Wow. Well, in the report, you make that clear. It's like these are the best analytics that you can have is look at those two factors.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, let's loop back to I'm starting out brand new. I'm starting to interview at a church. I mean, I start looking at those. I start asking those questions. How do you coach
Yeah.
somebody to begin to the negotiations?
Well, what I'll do is I have a piece of research that actually supports this. People who don't know their church's size and budget, because we have a spot to say not sure, they don't
Mm.
make as much as people that do.
Wow.
uh, Having your head in the sand and not knowing how your church's finances are structured is to your own detriment. If you're talking about a career, right? If I'm going to work at Coca-Cola, I know what the stock price of Coca-Cola is. I know who the board of directors are. I can find out what the CEO makes, right? Like it's not private. And so there's an element of you need to know the organization that you're working with. What are their metrics? What are they tracking? Because I guarantee you somebody's paying attention to the attendance and budget, and it's
Yeah.
impacting the budget of the church in general, right? They're cutting it somewhere if they're not making it. And so I always say if you're interviewing at a church, it's three great questions to ask is three categories of questions. What's your attendance like on a given weekend right now? And I say weekend because of the Saturday night service, but what's your Sunday attendance look like? And how does that trend compare to the last 3 years? And COVID kind of puts a wrinkle in that a little bit, but still, you get the idea of, are they trending up or down? Then I ask, what's the budget like this year? And what's the trend of the last 3 years been for that? Is it going down 2% every year? Is it going up 5%? And that'll give you an indication of what direction the church is going. Now, discipleship, you can't tie it to butts and seats and dollars in the offering plate, but like those are lights on the dashboard we can't ignore. And if the church budget's going down 5% every year, guess what? They're going to have a struggle on the budget at some point. It's going to impact on salaries or program budget or whatever. The third category of question I ask is, what's the debt like of the church? Do they have debt? And this is a hidden one. I learned this the hard way. Somebody once told me, who's wiser than me, the mortgage always gets paid first.
That's true.
And so, right? And think of it, if you're like your own personal budget, right? I pay my mortgage before I have my Starbucks budget, right? Before I have the things I like, I have the things that I need, right? Shelter, food, right? And so it's no different for your church. If your church is struggling to make budget and they have a large debt payment every month for a building they built or whatever, it's going to get paid before payroll or before your program budget or before camp or whatever. It's going to get paid first because you owe money. Likewise, if you find yourself at a church that has a surplus at the end of the year, meaning they're over budget, guess where that surplus is going? It's going to your principal on your debt. It's not, there's no chance of you getting an end of year bonus because that money needs to go towards the principal that you're paying a loan on, right? Like, it's just not how people use their finances in the real world. And so those are the three kind of categories of questions I would say every youth pastor needs to ask about. You can ask, how much debt do you have? What percentage of your budget goes to pay the debt, right? If it's over 20%, get out of there. Like, that's a red light because that's not financially sustainable for the nonprofit.
Yeah.
Sorry, I use that language because it's true of nonprofits and churches, which are nonprofits.
Yes. Yep. And that's, I think sometimes people, especially if you're new in youth ministry, you feel a little, it's a lot of nerves as you're interviewing and everything else. It's like, is that okay for me to ask? It's like, absolutely, it's okay for you to ask.
Yeah.
So
There's been a stigma of, if I ask for more money or I ask questions about the budget, I'm being perceived as greedy.
yes.
Any church that views you that way after asking those questions, you don't want to work there, to be
Yep.
honest, because they have a scarcity mindset. They are hiding something, probably, like, and I'm being really general and broad brush strokes, but anecdotally speaking, financial transparency at the church level should be a big deal, right?
Yeah.
And if you can't get those answers in a short amount of time from a church, it's probably not a great spot to build your career. It just probably
Exactly.
isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're indicating to them too that this is what I'm bringing. I'm thinking not just about discipleship and students and events. I'm thinking big picture and the whole church, and I care about numbers just as much as
And I,
in
and
finances.
I, yeah, and I want to be a healthy long-term fit at your church. These are
Yes.
part of qualifying. Like, I don't want to be another 2-year stopgap for your youth
Yep.
ministry. And then I realize I can't afford to work here. Like, I want to be able to set down roots and buy a house and raise my kids in the neighborhood where the church is. Here's what I think we need to do in order to do that. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's good stewardship is what that is. That's not greed at all.
Yep. Well, when I'm talking to youth pastors, especially new youth pastors, and they're starting the interview process, they often bring up, it's like, when is it okay for me to talk about salary and compensation? What do you suggest?
Early.
Really? Okay.
Early. Yeah. So in some states, I think there's a handful, like 6 or 7 states now, all jobs in those states, California is one of them, they have to post the payroll band by law.
Okay.
Nonprofits are not exempt from that. Yeah. I know you guys are launching a job board, like, hello,
Yep.
you have to post the pay range that role is eligible for. Um, and what I tell people all the time is, like, you can learn a lot by how they respond to that question of, what can I expect the pay range to be for this role starting? And then what's the ceiling like? Right? Like, every organization has that information in their head. They really do, right? The elders set the budget, the board set the budget. So might as well get that out of the way early. It's not a secret. And if it is a secret, again, probably not the right opportunity for you to start your career at. You want somebody who's going to care for you, who can understand the world of building a career and all those things. The other part, and this I think is relevant, especially in a denominational stream like the covenant, is it ministerial? Is
Mm.
this a housing allowance eligible position? Because not all of them are. Um, Whether it's a youth coordinator job or a youth director or youth pastor or youth minister, every stream uses different language out there, and not all of the churches recognize all those pastoral quote unquote roles as ministerial in the eyes of the IRS, which means you don't get a housing allowance, which means you're a W
Yeah.
2 employee. And that means that you don't pay 100% of your self-employment tax. You pay half of it, 7.4, 7.57, whatever the number is.
Mhm.
You pay your social security and disability and all that comes out of your check each month, and then the church matches it. The second you become a minister, you become self-employed, technically, even though you get a W-2 still. You're dual status. And this is very complicated for somebody who's never been paid that way before. I would highly recommend talking to a CPA, an accountant who specializes, or your denominational body who specializes in clergy compensation, so you can learn to understand when they say they're paying you $50,000 and you're a minister. Okay, that's great, but now I have to pay self-employment tax on $50,000, which is 15% right there off the top. You know you're going to pay 15%. That's $7,500 a year. So now your take home is $42,500. Like, you should be able to do that math in your head very quick. So
Yeah.
there's things like that that we have to become aware of and become equipped with, so that we can make sure that our career is sustainable.
Yeah, and I've noticed churches sometimes, especially our more town and country rural churches, will say, "Well, in lieu of a salary, we've got the manse or the parsonage next door, and so
Yes.
you've got housing there." And it's like you got to ask some questions about the housing.
And a church that has their books in order, you're going to pay taxes on the value of that rent. So
Mm,
even though it's a free roof over your head, the government doesn't see it that way. It's considered housing allowance, and you will pay social security tax on it still. So it's complicated. It really truly is. And if you're in your 20s and you're getting started, and this is your career, and you just finished college, and like, it's going to cost you a few $100 to talk to somebody who knows their way, or email Jenny, like
yeah.
call somebody who's been around the block, have a financial mentor who can help evaluate those things for you. Because I know when I was getting started in full-time ministry, I was just stoked to get a job offer.
Yep.
I was just thrilled. And I didn't ask about benefits. I didn't ask about vacation. I didn't ask about maternity leave, paternity leave. I didn't ask about what paid holidays there. I was just excited to have a job offer. And I said yes right away. Like, okay, well, it didn't last because it couldn't last. And I didn't ask about the church's budget. I didn't realize that they were stretching the budget to hire me and that they couldn't
Mhm.
afford it. And because I didn't bring in 20 new families that tied $50,000 a year, I didn't have a job after a year. Like, but that was the reality I was facing. I just didn't know. So,
Yep.
yeah, ask
That's great
questions.
advice. Yeah, what's kind of the rule of thumb for expectation full-time, healthy church for, like, vacation, sabbatical,
Yeah,
continuing ed? What do
it's
you
great.
what do you advise?
A lot of those non-ordained positions don't have sabbatical. Most youth pastors that take our survey are not eligible for sabbatical. Um, and to be honest, most of them don't make it to the 6 or 7 or 5 years that they would qualify for it anyway. And then for them to take sabbatical means they don't have summer camp because they're gone like, it's just a mess. Some churches have their act together on that and they are more systematic about it. It's very rare, very rare. Um, what I have learned is churches will have their policies in place, right? You get 10 days of paid vacation while you're for the first 2 or 5 or whatever it is years. Um, but you can ask for additional paid time off in your bank of vacation when you start. So, for instance, I came from one church to another. I had done 5 years at that church and I had 4 weeks of paid vacation. Well, the church I was starting at, I had to start the clock over. And I said, well, I'm coming off a place where I can take 4 weeks off a year and 3 Sundays. Can you match that? They said, no, but our policy will let us put 2 weeks of vacation in the bank for you. So you can start with 2 weeks. You don't have to accrue two, and then you just have a rolling accrual. So it ended up being a wash because I had the vacation to spend. It worked out in that case. Um,
Yeah.
one of the ones that, especially if you think in the foreseeable future you're going to get married and start a family. Like that's part of what you feel like God is leading you towards. Even if you don't have a spouse and you don't have kids yet, or you're not pregnant, ask about time off when the baby comes.
Oh
You
man.
should
Yeah.
not, it costs the church nothing for them to say, take a month off. Like they'll just keep paying your salary. Uh, The churches that are smart about caring for their youth pastors that are starting young families, they are generous around that time of life, because it doesn't do you any good to take 3 weeks all to empty your vacation, empty your sick time, and then all of a sudden you're back to work after a month and you have no days off for the next 11 months. That's a disaster, right? With a
Yeah.
with a newborn. So the best thing that can happen is they just gift you some PTO and say keep your vacation, keep your sick time. The other one is depending on how you're paid, you may not qualify for disability, which means you may not get government assistance and reimbursement if you are out for paid family medical leave. So like learning that before you accept a job, right? If I don't get paid family medical leave, which pays, I think, 55% of your income, like that's a state program or federal
Yeah.
program. Like you need to know those things so that you don't get caught saying, yeah, I had the baby on my spouse had the baby on Monday and I did youth group Wednesday night. Like that's a recipe for you're going to hate the church
Yeah.
because you're not caring for your first ministry, which is your family, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I always advise get it in writing. It's amazing how short
Yes.
churches' memories are. It's like, wait,
Yes.
no, our policy is, 5 days your first year. And it's like, but in the interview you said, and it's like, get everything in writing.
Yes. Yes.
We advise,
Do not verbally accept anything.
oh
You
my
need to have a
gosh.
piece of paper that is emailed to you, an attachment to an email, not a written out email. You need an offer letter. And the language you use is, when can I expect an offer letter? If they say we offered you the job, no, when can I expect an offer letter? Put it all in paper. Here's what I get. And they'll just say paid time off and paid holidays as per our handbook. Well, you need to see the handbook then. Send me
Yep.
the handbook, right? A lot of churches will make you sign the back page of the handbook, meaning you acknowledge the policies in the handbook. Great. You need to know the policies. Run them by somebody who's smarter than you and ask them, does this make sense? Is this good? Like, you don't want to hamstring yourself. So,
That's
very,
great
very important
advice.
stuff.
Yep. We're advising, if at all possible, to do 4 weeks of it, churches to start with 4 weeks, just because it's like youth ministry right now is so stressful with all adolescents are dealing with. It's like, put that just at the beginning, that
Yeah.
all ministerial staff gets 4 weeks vacation to start with.
Yeah.
So,
It's hard for churches that have bylaws and manuals to
yeah.
just change that. It takes months to get that through the approval process. But there's other things they can do. What's comp time look like after camp, right?
Mhm.
You go away for a week or a mission trip. Do you have to use your own vacation, or are you expected at work at church on Sunday? You flew in Saturday night. Like, how does that work, right? And they can't just say, "Oh yeah, take a day or two off." Like, there should be some sort of policy around that to protect you from everybody else in the office saying, "Hey, Dan just got back from summer camp. Why isn't he here?" Right? Like, so it should just
What are
be
some good rules of
clear.
thumb for comp time?
The reality is that is, yeah. What are the rules? If you're a salary exempt employee, meaning you are exempt from overtime compensation, per your state's guidelines, uh, there you are not entitled to compensation time, right? Because you're exempt.
Yeah.
You can work as many hours as possible, and you're paid a flat rate salary. Um, so you're not entitled to any of it. Most churches see it as a value to give some time off, but they just kind of make it up, right? Uh, I've seen policies in place for every if you reach 60 hours worked in any 7 week period, every 8 hours over that 60 hours you work, we will give you 8 hours of comp time, right? There's all kinds of complex math that could go into it. It's different in every camp, but if you come home from a week of summer camp and you don't get a couple days off, like, oh, that's a bummer. That's a bummer. And
Yeah.
take advantage of it. Like, don't put the pressure on yourself to perform. Like, take advantage of that. Love your family. Go to the beach. Do something.
Yep. Good advice. That's good. Um, so what advice do you have for people to negotiate? They're in a position, they haven't seen even cost of living increase or
Sure.
maybe just that. How do they go about these
Yeah.
conversations?
Well, let me back up one step. For the person who has not yet taken the job,
Mhm.
You get your first raise on the day that you take the job. So it's really, really hard. Every church that's interviewing you will ask what you need. They'll ask. It's a good tactic in life to ask the person to give their number. Okay. So
Yep.
Ginny was interviewing me. She'd say, "Hey Dan, what are you thinking for a salary?" And I'd say, "Well, I need $50,000." And Ginny in her mind was willing to go to 70, but Dan just came in at 50. So great. All right. Well, we think we can manage that, right? She keeps a straight face. It's really, really good for you if they're not going to share the payroll banding for them to offer the first number. Well, we came out. We're thinking right around 50, and inevitably, I would advise every person who's ever in an interview situation to immediately tack on 10% and counter offer. Okay, it's a standard
Yep.
tactic in the world. So if they offer you 50, I was really thinking 55 based on my past accomplishments and resume. I think I'm qualified for more than that. And I ran a $25 report from churchsalary.com right here that substantiates that number, right? Whatever the number is, come in over the median, over the average. Inevitably, you probably won't get 10%, but they might split the difference. That's kind of a tactic that a lot of supervisors use. Oh, you want 55? We offered you 50. How about we split the difference and we go 52.5? Well, you just got a $2,500 raise on your first day. Okay. And mathematically, $2,500 doesn't sound like a lot of money, but that's 5%. And I just told you the average youth pastor's salary is going up less than or thereabouts 2% every year. So you just got almost 3 years worth of annual raises in
Wow.
1 year before you even start, right? And then it's very, very, very few youth pastors have their salary reduced. Okay. Typically that comes with job being reduced, hours
Mhm.
being reduced, something like that. They don't usually say, hey, we paid you 50 this year, but we can only afford 47 this year. So what you've done is you've raised the basement floor. Now, say I'm in that job and I'm making 50 grand and I've been making 50 grand for a few years, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever the number is. I would highly recommend sending a copy in advance to your supervisor of the survey saying, hey, I'd like for you to read through this and I'd like to ask for a performance review so we could review my past performance and talk about future expectations. That language right there
Yeah.
disarms your supervisor from feeling ambushed because your supervisor is probably got a degree in theology and Sunday is coming. They are not business people. Even though they might be running a
Yes.
multi-million dollar corporation, it is not their area of expertise. Their area of expertise is praying with people who are dying, right? Like they are called by God to teach the word and disciple people. And like, they're not thinking about compliance. They're
Yep.
not thinking about
Exactly.
HR. They're not thinking about payroll the way that you think they should, right?
Yeah.
And so um, sending them the report and saying, I'd like to schedule a time where we can review my past performance and talk about future expectations. That language clearly and respectfully and humbly communicates to your supervisor, I think I'm entitled to a raise. Because you're
Yeah.
sending them the documentation to back it up. Pay the $25, get the report from church salary and send it to them. And it'll show them on a bell curve. Here's what the median salary is with my education and tenure. Here's the number. That's the median. And then it's your job to say, based on my past performance, I believe I'm an above median employee. Is it possible that we could talk about a pathway to where I could be earning this amount of money, right? That I feel like this is what I'm worth and this is what my family needs. And so you didn't just ask for a raise, you asked for a solution. What's the
It's
pathway
great.
right? See, you feel the
Yeah.
difference in the language, right? Like, help me help you come up with a pathway where I could be earning $60,000, right? That's a significant raise from 50 to 60, right? Percentage wise.
Yeah.
You're talking about a 20% raise. Well, those don't just fall out of the tree. You have to work towards that and you have to have a plan. And by the way, your supervisor has to go to the board and they have to develop the budget. He might say, there's no money in the budget this year. Okay. Can we put it in the budget for next year? And I can work with you on a solution towards that. Maybe we're going to fundraise part of the budget over here for the program budget. Maybe it's, we're going to work towards this line item over here. We're going to take away from that. Like, how can I help you solve that problem so that I can support my family or
Yep.
support myself if you don't have a family?
Yep. That's great because you're giving them the narrative and you're also I've noticed that lead pastors can just start feeling awkward for the very reason you named.
Yes.
This is not what they're used to. So they are going to start, they don't know what to do with it. And their tendency is sometimes I'm going to shut this conversation down because I feel awkward. You just gave
Yes.
the youth pastor language. Beautiful.
And don't wait for your supervisor to set your annual one-on-one, to set your
Yes.
annual review. 50% of youth pastors that take my survey every year, the number is always right around 50 to 55%, do not have an annual review with their supervisor where they feel like they can talk about compensation. So
Yep.
don't wait for your boss to say, hey, it's time for your annual review. You send the email and say, hi, I'd like for you to take a look at this report that I downloaded from this website, and I'd like a chance to review my my performance over the past year and talk about expectations for next year. Like, you send that email and you initiate it. You show the ambition, you show the drive, you show the passion, and they need to come to that meeting ready to talk. And they will do the homework, right? Don't ask for the meeting tomorrow. Give them a couple of weeks. And if you get crickets from that, first of all, I would say you should hit the COV job board, because that supervisor is not caring well for you and it's not a great place to
Yep.
grow your career. And second of all, you can always go to a board member who you know of who is pro youth. Maybe it's a parent who's got a kid in your youth ministry, and say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but I asked for an annual review of my supervisor and I didn't even hear back from them. Are you on the board? Could you maybe talk to them on my behalf? Like, be humble, be
Yeah.
humble, you know?
Yeah. And that's it. You say it, the squeaky wheel has a better chance of getting oil. Just be sure to squeak with humility. And I think we just have not learned how to advocate for ourselves, especially I'm going to talk about gender here. I mean, as women in youth ministry, uh, I never learned how to advocate. It was always really rough. And I finally got a coach when not this job, but a different one. And I said, coach me for how do I do this? And it was a woman who
Yeah.
worked in HR. And she's like, you'll never get what you don't ask for. She goes,
Yes.
ask for it. And
Yes.
and so I got some consulting and asked for much higher than I ever anticipated. And the person's like, "Yeah, we can do that." Which also, after what you said, I'm like, "Dang, I should ask for more."
Well,
But it was that
and
sense of getting a coach.
and there's this fear that I'm going to get fired if I ask for a
Yeah,
raise. And the reality is, the worst thing that happens 9 out of 10 times is they say no. That's the worst thing, that the worst outcome. The church that fires you for asking for a raise just did you a favor, because you
yep,
shouldn't be working there. That's
yep,
that I can almost guarantee you that somebody is doing something that's not legal, it feels like. I'm talking
yeah,
really generally here. I don't, like,
yep,
this isn't stories I'm telling, but like, if you're that intimidated by having a conversation about compensation, there's probably some sketchy stuff happening with the books.
mm,
Whether
yep.
it's we're giving money to missionaries and we're not reporting it, like, there's all kinds of good things that happen that they're not for public
Interesting.
consumption. Yeah, it's scary.
Yep,
Well, let's talk about women.
yeah. Talk about. I mean, because there's some discrepancy. It seems like the gap is getting smaller.
Yes.
But still it's significant. What's going on there? What are you observing?
Uh, I hang on one second. Sorry.
No
I know
worries.
we're recording, but I have a gardener question that I had to answer on text message. Sorry.
Well, time wise, I want to keep an eye on it. Are you good for going a
Yeah,
little bit longer?
I am absolutely.
Okay.
The reality is, uh, the gender wage gap in America is an issue, is a problem, um, and it's a similar problem in Christchurch. Okay, now I have to, whenever I talk about this, go on record saying I understand that there's some theological streams that don't believe that women should be in ministry. Okay, I'm not even talking to you right now. Okay, I'm talking about the denominational bodies and the non-denominational churches that affirm women in pastoral positions are paying them 70, like 82 cents on the dollar. So 80 cents on the dollar, what they're paying their male colleagues with exact same qualifications, tenure, and education. Okay. This is a crisis. It is a justice issue. Um, I am tired of organizations paying females less because the man is also working and he's working a secular job that pays more money and so they don't need it, or they're a mom and they're doing it 30 hours a week and it's just a side hustle for them while they're staying home. Like, no, forget that. We don't hire people because of what we can afford to pay them. We hire people because they're gifted and called by God. So let's just get off. I'm going to get off my soapbox here in a second, but like, it doesn't matter if my spouse makes $1 million or if my spouse chooses to stay home with my 3 kids. You should be paying me the same. It shouldn't matter, right? The policies shouldn't change.
Amen.
The payroll banding shouldn't change. That's why
Yeah.
California and other states have said you need to publish the payroll banding so that you can't just lowball because you got a low value, a buy low, sell high candidate, right? Oh man,
Yeah.
we're budgeted to move a family of 4 to this church and pay a living wage, right? In California, that's like 80 grand or 75 grand, whatever the number is. But man, we actually found this family who the spouse got a job at the college. They're a government employee. They got great benefits. That they're going to come. We don't even need to pay them what we budgeted because they're making good money. No, 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 no,
Yep.
no. That is sinful. I'm gonna go that far. That is sinful.
That's
Okay.
oh man, I want to say preach.
Yeah, no. So, and I, not everybody can hear that. So, for instance, I get to, because I actually have the data, I get to pick on different denominations. The Methodist Church is unequivocally the most egalitarian denomination out there. They are, some would even say progressive, right, in terms of who they'll ordain and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, yay for championing women in ministry, but they pay them like garbage compared to their male
Wow.
colleagues. I mean, it's like 30% difference.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, the Presbyterians are also egalitarian, but they're much closer, much closer. There's still a gap, but it's closer. Nationally, what happened the last few years? The gap has hovered around 12%, male versus female, apples to apples. Last 2 years ago, it swarmed up to 18%. We saw a huge growth in the gap, which was a tragedy. This last year, we saw the gap shrink back down to 12%, okay, which is about what it normally is. We've gotten it anywhere from 12 to 14% over the last however many years. What that actually equated to was women saw a 7% raise in their national average last year, which is
Mm.
awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
The national average for a male youth pastor last year, it technically, according to my data, went down $100 annually, or like $500.
Wow.
It basically stayed the same. So the 2% national rise we saw in youth pastor compensation was 100% fueled by the female wage going up. Okay.
Wow.
This is not good news. Okay. It
Yeah.
sounds like good news, but it's not good news because and I say this in the report, if we see the male wage not go up again next year, I'm going to sound the alarm that this is a crisis, that we've reached the ceiling for youth pastors. And that's a problem because the ceiling is not high enough. We need to see
Yeah.
the male average go up 5% next year and the female average go up 12%. That's what we really need to be seeing in order to catch up with the economy that we live in, where the price of gas has doubled in the last 15 months, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not making these numbers up, right? So, those are the types of things that are very alarming. If you are a woman and you are listening to this, I would recommend that when you talk to your church, that that you even ask point blank, is the payroll ban different for a male candidate with my credentials? And run as far away as you can if they say yes. Like,
Yeah.
and if you find out that they're paying you less because you're a woman, I mean, there's a spot in the survey every year for people to write comments and ask questions. And I also say, if you need a place to vent, this is a safe spot.
Mm.
And out of 1,000 youth pastors that filled this out last year, there was, I want to say, 300 women that filled it out. And of those 300 women, you'd be alarmed at how many horror stories I've heard of,
Wow.
I had a baby and came back and my job was different, or I don't, like, it's just terrible. And so I in no way want to defend the institution. We need you. The institution needs you. The best way you can change the institution is by not running away from the institution. And by one institution, I mean the church, like capital C
Mhm.
church. We need you. We need female youth workers. It's knowing your worth and advocating for yourself and doing it in humility, but also not being a doormat. Don't let people just
Yep.
walk all over you. Like,
Yep.
that's my song, and I'm going to sing it loud.
Do you ever ask what the gender is of the lead pastor or of the church chair? Because that would be interesting to see if there's any, if that
No,
influences the salary at all.
I don't. And the reality is, the vast majority of the youth pastors that take my survey come from a conservative evangelical background. I mean, the Baptist
Okay.
denomination is my largest reporting denomination, and they are pretty much 100% male pastors only.
Yeah.
There's only a handful of female pastors that take my survey from the Baptist stream.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
um, it's a troubling trend. It really is. It's difficult. Um,
When you say it's a
yeah.
troubling trend, forecast. Why is it troubling? What do you see the consequences being if this continues?
What are the consequences? Well, I think one of the unintended consequences is you're going to have a whole lot of women who feel called to ministry who can't afford to be in ministry. Um, at some point, and I'm talking about college educated. I'm not talking about a mom who's volunteering in the evenings to do youth ministry. I'm talking about women who are my age. I'm 37, who went to school to study the Bible and have gone through an accreditation program to become ordained or certified or whatever. Like, there's going to be a lot of them who can't afford to stay if this doesn't change, because we're seeing that
Yeah.
with the men, and the men are paid more,
Yeah.
right? There is a um, if you just think of the churches that are within earshot of your wherever it is that you live, whoever's listening to this, and you think through the people that are in the youth ministry chair at those churches, and then you think to yourself, okay, they're probably making this number, whatever that number is. Then go look at their spouse. What's their spouse doing? Does their spouse work full time? Does their spouse is their spouse the primary breadwinner? But I think you'll be shocked at who is in youth ministry and why they're allowed to be in youth ministry, and it's because their spouse is earning a significant wage. Very few youth pastors who are married that take this survey have a spouse who's not working full time, and that's not the American way, right?
Yeah.
That's why you have kids growing up in a confused culture, because mom or dad is not parenting as the primary parent because they're at daycare all day because I have to work. And it's a tumble down effect. I don't want to get too weird, too in the weeds on that stuff, but it can be really, really scary. What kind of deterioration we could see. Um,
Yep.
I don't want to claim slippery slope argument, but it's a very slippery one. So
Yeah. Well, I'm just seeing it with churches having a decrease in concern for the adolescents in their community. And so we can't hire anybody. And it's like we just care for the kids that show up under the steeple. So,
yeah, yeah, there definitely is a decrease in churches emphasizing evangelism in a youth ministry, right? Hey,
yep.
I want you to go out and be on campus. Well, that you can only be on campus if you get all your other work done. And by the way, I need you
Yeah.
to edit video and run sound and sweep the church and set up chairs, right? Like, no, hang on a second. Like, yeah,
Yeah. What could
sorry.
you talk just
And I
about that?
digress.
Well, we're seeing churches looking for a blend. So, and
Hmm.
oftentimes now it's being titled as next gen. And so you're
Hmm.
being hired to do next gen. Are you seeing that as well? Is that national? Um,
Uh, Yeah, it's been around for a while. It really has.
okay.
I wouldn't say it's a growing trend. And quite frankly, if you're going to hire a 20-something-year-old who hasn't raised kids to be over your nursery, preschool, elementary, um, like that's fine if that's your strategy. But like, they aren't going to be able to speak to nor understand the pressures that a parent is dealing with and just getting their family to church, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate of letting the youth ministers do youth ministry and not putting the other ancillary parts on their plate. But I realize that's not some church's model. And you have a seasoned youth pastor who's overseeing next gen and all this, and they're just hands on with the youth ministry. Okay, fine, like, great. Um, but again, if you're going to be supervising other employees and setting their wage, like, now you're at the adults table. You have a lot of responsibility to care for your employees, right? Which is what you're asking your supervisor to do. And so I remember that transition in my own career, going from I'm the youth minister to now I'm overseeing some other stuff, and like, oh my gosh, now I have responsibility of trying to balance that budget. So find ways to be generous to your people. find ways to be generous to your people. Um, find non-monetary ways to be generous to your people. I had one boss who was, um, he was a good man, and he knew when I had a long week, and several times in my years of working for him, he'd show up on my porch on a Thursday evening with a bottle of wine and just say, "Hey, this is for you guys. Enjoy your weekend." And
Wow.
that's a small token of, I appreciate you and I see you grinding and I know it's been a long week. Enjoy this time with your wife, like, and like, don't pick up the phone, right?
Yep.
Like that's a small $10 bottle of wine that's going to go a long way for me feeling appreciated. But not other non-monetary things, right? Talking about paternity, maternity leave, or books. You know what it means for a young pastor, for a veteran pastor, to walk into their office and say, "Open your computer, pull up Amazon. You have $200 to spend on as many books as you can fit in $200."
Wow.
Do you know what a gift that is to a youth pastor or a kids pastor? Like,
Oh my
200
goodness.
bucks out of your discretionary budget as a senior pastor or executive pastor is nothing, right? But you might have a book allowance of $1,000. Literally, that's, I've seen
Yeah.
churches with that book allowance. Like, to walk in there and tell them, go buy as many books as you can for $100 or $200. That's such a gift to them. Like, that breathes life into them. That helps them dream. Like, and if they
Yeah.
don't know what books to buy, like, just Google Bob Goff, right? Like start there. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
and find ways like that to care for your team and to
Mm.
be cared for. Cash in that family at church who's got that cabin and say, "Hey, go with your family. Not Don't use vacation time. Go have a, we'll call it sabbatical, study leave. Go have study leave." Like, we got all kinds of church names for, I'm getting away and I'm really on vacation, but I'm caring for my own soul. Like, do that for the people you supervise. That is the way we, in the real world, they call it long-term incentive, LTI.
Mm. Mm.
Corporations hand out LTI in the form of stock. If
Yeah.
you stay with our company, you can have stock in the company, which means you have higher earning potential. There's dollars attached to it. What's the LTI for your church? Sabbatical is a good LTI. If you make it to 5 years, we're going to give you 6 months off, and we're going to give you $5,000 to spend during the 6 months.
Wow.
We want you to go to Israel. We want you to go to Hawaii. We want you to go be away, right?
Yeah.
Like, or 1 month, who cares what it is, but like, have some LTI so that I see the horizon of, like, my church is caring for me. They're putting this thing out there. Also, I tell young youth pastors all the time who are like going to go to seminary and they're taking out loans. I know we're over time. Who cares? Right? I tell them all the time, somebody at your church that's been around for 60 years, somebody might have written a check at one point and designated it for education. Okay. Ask your
Yeah.
supervisor, "Hey, is there any designated funds at our church that I could use towards school?" Like, you know how many times I've heard the answer to that question be yes? Many, personally.
Wow. Yeah.
Or even if it's $500 for books for this year, right? It's $500 I don't have to spend,
Yep.
right? Like, take it. Or, hey, would the church be willing to pay for 1 unit of my seminary degree this semester? Just 1 unit. How
Yeah.
much is a unit, Dan? Oh, it's $500. Yeah, we could do that. It comes from a different pocket. It comes from a different, right? If you want to go get trained in something, like, there might be another pocket of money in the church budget that can help do that. Conference is another one, right? Like, instead of like raising all this money to go to camp and like that's the end of it, what if you tack $20 onto the cost of camp for every kid and that pays your conference, right?
That's
And you
great.
just
Yeah.
look at it as one giant slush fund. If somebody writes a check to the campership fund, it's going to the conference and campership fund. Like, just look at it differently and just help.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of coaching that can happen there, but there's a lot of resources out there besides paycheck money to make your life better. Cell phone
Yeah.
reimbursement, mileage reimbursement, all that kind of stuff. Like, those are different. They're not payroll dollars, so they're
Yep.
they're thought of differently.
Man, we need you talking to our search committees and our HR
Yeah,
committees at
happily,
churches.
happily. Well, and
That is,
don't get me started on the HR side of things, because uh, churches don't know that sometimes what they're doing is illegal. Uh,
say
I
more.
I did I did a hard look at California several years ago, because California's salary exemption laws require that you're paid double minimum wage over a 40-hour work week in order to be considered exempt from overtime. Okay.
Wow.
Well, at that time, minimum wage in California was $15 an hour, $14 an hour, whatever it was. which meant you really had to be making like, it was like $55,000 a year in order to be lawfully considered exempt. And 1 in 5 California youth pastors that took my survey reported a salary number lower than that number, whatever the numbers were. 20%
Yeah. Wow.
of youth pastors were not being paid what I would consider a lawful wage in our state. Now, there's a small asterisk to that where if you're considered ministerial, you're technically self-employed, which means you're not subject to those law requirements, wage requirements. But then there's an ethical problem that churches have to wrap their head around, right? So
Yeah.
I just like, churches don't know what they don't know. Like I said, Sunday is always coming, and your boss's job is to preach on Sunday, and right. And so getting equipped and learning what the wage laws are in your state, you know, a
Yeah.
lot of churches did this with their intern program years ago. Churches used to have intern programs where you pay $500 a month, and like it was a stipend, they called it. It's illegal now in most states. Like, you can't do it. To call something
Yeah.
an internship, there's very clear qualifications that the IRS requires for an internship to be an actual internship. And so churches wised up to that because the heat got turned up from the government, and now you don't see a lot of internships rolling around.
Yep.
Um, you see a lot of school of ministry where people pay you to be an intern, but like
Yeah.
it's just the culture's just changed. So
Well, we've run into that like when we have part-time youth pastors and they're supposed to go on a retreat or on our like big high school event in the summer. And it's like,
oh yeah,
how do we do this? How do we compensate them?
what's the answer? What's the answer? I'm curious. I'll put you on the spot.
uh, I'm trying to remember now. A lot of times it's you have to figure out how you pay them overtime for
Yeah,
that
you
time.
need to
And then do you pay 24 hours a day? Do you pay just the time they're awake? And some I think we're
and
doing a swap with vacation. So
there's all kinds of loopholes that churches have tried to figure out in order to do this, but as best I can tell, in most states you need to pay them the hourly wage that they are entitled to if they're part-time and they make an hourly wage, and that hourly wage becomes an overtime wage if even if they're asleep and they're with students. So if they have their own sleeping quarters away from students and they're technically not on the clock, right? They are not responsible. You have another
yeah,
designated adult who's responsible, then they can have an 8-hour reset on their time clock. But uh, I have not yet found a church that is willing to pay an overtime wage for 5 days of camp at 24 hours a day. I just can't find one,
yep,
because you might as well have a full-time salary exempt employee at that point, most people say. So it's very tricky. And I actually wrote in a blog years ago, I actually believe that's part of the reason why you're going to see the rise in VBS for youth
mm,
ministry.
yeah,
The days between the cost of camp going up to go away to camp, right? The camp costs more, the bus to camp costs more, the rental van, everything costs more. And my church is empty that week during the summer. It's
yeah,
empty. We have an air conditioned building that is empty. What if we brought camp to the church? Well, VBS has been doing that for years, right? Children's ministry has been doing that for years. Everybody goes home, right, at the end of the day. Like, I think you're going to see, and you're seeing this at mega church level, a lot of
yeah,
satellite churches, you're seeing them run, they call it conference instead of camp, or Camp X. It's their
yeah,
youth conference. It's the same type of impact. You're just not sleeping in a bunk bed in a cabin, but you get control over the speaker, the program, the price point's half. Like, I just thought that was going to be a trend that was going to come and it was going to stay. It hasn't caught at the mid-level church yet, but it's coming.
yeah.
I really believe it.
That doesn't surprise, especially when you think of it from a risk management level, because you no longer have overnight, so you don't have to worry about where we gonna house, what about security,
And
uh,
what do
all
I
of
do with the
that.
transgender kid that's going on the trip? No matter where you fall in that
Yep,
all theologically, like it's still a question you have to solve and answer, right?
yep,
So like that solves that. If we're not sleeping in the same room, we don't have to solve that problem. It's just a discussion group. Like, yeah. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but I think wage is going to drive it a lot.
yeah,
I think the
yep,
days of Christian camp they're heading downwards, unfortunately. And I love camp.
mm,
I love
yeah.
camp. I would have been a youth pastor for free, or I would have gone to camp for free if they paid me to be the youth pastor, which is what they did. I love camp,
Well,
but
we have 5 camps in our region here. Camping is huge in the Covenant. I think
yeah,
somebody said for a denomination our size, we should have like 2 camps, and I forget, we have a gazillion of them because it's just
yeah,
part of our DNA.
yeah,
It's
love
huge.
it.
Well, I have taken so much of your time. This has been incredibly valuable. Oh my goodness. I can't wait to get the word out about this. I feel like every paid youth pastor needs to be listening to this. So thank you so
Yeah,
much. Any last words that you want to give us? Last bits of advice?
yeah, and Yes, thank you. I'm glad you let me have one last thing. Because after you listen to an hour of me be angry about the state of youth ministry compensation, it's easy to hang up this, to turn off the podcast or whatever, and to be bitter.
Mm,
And I just want to speak life over the calling of every person who's going to hear this, that no, 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 God has you where he has you, not to be bitter. Tend to the bitterness, bring the bitterness to the Father. Let him empty that bucket of bitterness so that you don't kick it over and it spills out. Um, that doesn't mean you become blind to it. You care for your soul, you care for your family, care for your career, get some coaching, get some help. There are people who would love to help you, whether you're in a denominational stream or not. Um, but yeah, don't hang up and be angry, um, because teenagers need Jesus. Like, can we just all agree that whether you're
yeah,
getting paid or not, they need Jesus, and you might be the best chance somebody has to hear about Jesus. So don't give up. Don't give up. Don't ever give
beautiful.
up.
Ah, thank you for that word. Yeah, that is really important after a conversation like this.
Yep.
Thank you for your time with us, and man, blessings on your future and what you're doing.